in Power Apps. In the Power FX language that Microsoft has specified, and they've named it Power FX. Of course, we've always known it as the coding that you do in Power Apps. And so both Kurt and I have a lot of experience in our profession of computer programming, software development. And what we're going to do is we're really going to focus and hone in on this aspect of software development using Microsoft Power Apps. So what do you think about that, Kurt and Jeff?
Well, I'm excited to learn.
I'm glad you are, Jeff, because I think that, people like yourself who are just starting to get going into the Power Apps development, we talked about data being the number one thing and the most important thing, and it's very true. But right behind the data is being able to code, being able to understand the fundamentals of what's going on. Remember, we talked about reading records, processing records, and writing records. Well, so much of processing a record is dealing with what we're going to be dealing with today. So this is really big for you guys that are just getting started with this.
I think something that we should call out which is the elephant in the room, guys. What is the big elephant in the room? This is supposed to be a low code, no code type of platform, right?
That's an elephant.
Well, one of the things I cover in my crash course that I start off with. So, Microsoft is marketing this thing as a low code, no code tool for citizen developers. I'm not sure if a citizen developer actually exists. Probably my best definition is a software developer in disguise, doesn't know they're a software developer yet, who doesn't work in IT or doesn't work in IT yet. That's probably the closest definition I have to a citizen developer, but people come in with the idea, oh, I don't have to code, I don't have to worry about that. So the low code, you're going to have some code in there. If you want to absolutely avoid all the code, you want to go with model-driven applications. So you're not doing any type of coding or Power Automate. But Canvas types of apps in Power Apps, you're definitely going to be working with some code. Especially if you're starting to do anything complex or any type of workaround, you really need to embrace the coding. So that's what I like to encourage everyone who is watching us live or watching this after the live event is really embrace the coding. Learn how to code. If you say I'm not a coder or if you've never done any coding, I want to challenge you to learn coding with Power Apps for the first time.
You talk about the no-code environment with the Microsoft's marketing, and they are true. You can write apps with low code and no code, but they're just not going to be much of an app. They're going to be they're going to look just like a low code, no code app, right? I mean, you can do it. It's just, it's not the same, right?
Yeah, and I think the form control, the edit form control really lends itself to being able to essentially, what you're trying to do almost on every screen is you're trying to read a record, write a record, right? And the form control pretty much allows that for a record, and you can put up a gallery. Now, in setting up the properties and wire things together, you are going to write expressions, but anything in that little top bar, that FX bar at the top, is you're writing code there.
You're writing code.
You're writing code. So what I recommend is just sort of, if coding sort of freaks you out, just sort of ease into it. Probably by the time you've gotten to this video, you've already accepted that you're going to be learning at least functions to be used within your Power Apps.
Within that, Darren, a lot of guys have been using Excel. A lot of people have been using Excel, and so much of the coding in Power Apps is so similar to the coding you do in Excel. When you put a function in there in Excel, you're coding at some level. You're coding right there. So just you might think you're not a programmer, you might think you're not a coder, but you've been using Excel for a long time. So maybe you're more than you think you are in that. Go ahead, Darren. Sorry to interrupt there.
Yeah, so that's why I say, you're a programmer and you don't even know it. So give yourself credit for what you already know. You've been perhaps using if then else's and loops. which is definitely programming, definitely core programming concepts. And you never really equated that to coding. Okay. So I want to encourage you to just sort of embrace what you've already done so far as coding. So a lot of people are interested in my notes that I have here, let's say from last week, and I'll be making these available. Let me sort of rearrange some things here. Maybe this would look a little better, or maybe this here. Here we go. I like that. Yeah, I'll be making these notes available, and there are links to different things. So, so other titles I was thinking of for this video that might describe what we're going to be covering: computer programming using Power Apps. So you got words like coding, computer programming. There's also a term software developer, which I don't know. What do you think the difference is, Kurt, between a software developer and a computer programmer? And would you say both of them are coders?
Yeah, I think a software developer is somebody who goes behind. They're designing the program as well as coding the program, right? They're the ones that they're conceptualizing it. They're all things in one. You know, you always talk about architects and all that, but really the developer does a little bit of all those things, whereas the coder, they're the guys that have the visor and the pocket protector, and they're in there just typing away, and they don't care about anything. They don't want to deal with no meetings. They don't want to deal with any of that kind of stuff, you know.
Kurt has this theory that there are two types of coders. There's a hippie type of coder, and there's a nerd or a geek type of coder. So I guess you were talking about the latter there.
Yeah.
And you're like a hippie type of coder, right? You always told me with a hippie type of coder, all they have to do is conceptualize it, and all the details are meaningless. It's already done in their head, right?
Right. The program is finished when they thought of it. It's done. Okay, on to the next one. You know.
Yeah.
You know, those are extremes. You know, there's a lot of things in between those two, right? But yeah. But then you got the guy that does nothing but eat Hot Pockets all night long, and they're up till 3 a.m. and hacking away at some code, you know. And
you know, it's funny, they sort of depict computer programmers, coders as almost like hackers. If you go and just do a search for like some images of a computer programmer, you either see matrix, green matrix code, or you'll see some guy with a hoodie on with a little laptop, and partly of what you're describing there, all the Hot Pocket boxes and the Mountain Dew, and these guys are just hacking into people's firewalls and wreaking havoc. And
apart from the wrecking havoc on firewalls, that used to be me though. I used to be that guy that would just stay up till 3 a.m. I go, oh, I'm just gonna stay up for a little bit longer, and I can't figure out how come my stomach's why am I so hungry? Well, you've been up doing this for over 24 hours, you know. You get in that zone, you know.
Absolutely. All right. So, Power Apps coding, learning to code using Power Apps. So these were the different phrasing I was working with of what we're going to all talk about. So yeah, the software developer, they could have additional other things that are necessary for that type of role. I almost see a software developer as a superset. And I think you were sort of describing that, a superset of maybe what is just a coder or just a computer programmer. You know, so they might need to do things like gather requirements and you know, maybe do a little bit of design work that the coder is like, no, just give me the algorithm that you need me to code. You know,
well, you think of it. You think of it like somebody has an idea for a program. You know, some business owner has an idea for a programmer. Well, a software developer is going to develop that idea into a program. They're going to actually make that program happen from an idea. So you got to concept from a conception. You've got to be able to take it in and go that whole distance with it, you know.
Yeah. So just keeping an eye on the comments here.
I was just gonna say that.
Yeah, I like this comment from Fabian. Just embrace coding.
Just embrace it.
Just embrace it. And then Rosa, even though coding is challenging for me, the idea of seeing it come alive is super exciting. Absolutely. Yes. That it is very exciting.
It's also it's a frustration too, right? Because oftentimes when it comes alive with a whole lot of things that you didn't really want. You're like, what? What's this thing doing? You know?
Yeah. And if you're not aware of things that are common for a computer programmer to go through, psychologically, mentally, you
Oh,
might think that they have got a mental disorder because they're laying awake at night because they didn't resolve some issue in their code. But also sometimes going to sleep on it, you might wake up with the answer though too. But
oftentimes, oftentimes.
yeah, there seems to be like this. I don't know, like a psychological or behavior pattern with a coder. Is you're excited, I'm going to do something. How am I going to do it? And you start doing it, and it's like this big puzzle. You're putting all these
It's a
puzzles to
puzzle.
figuring out you're a problem solver here. You're implementing order to chaos, and then you're like, okay, this code should do it, and then you run and it doesn't work. Okay, what's wrong? And then it's you go through this cycle of, okay, yeah, that worked. No, that didn't work. And then sometimes you get caught on, okay, that doesn't work. How do I do this? Sometimes you get stuck. You get stuck on that. And what's good about our every once in a while I'll talk about the Accelerator program. That's actually one of the things that part of my offering is if you're stuck at any phase, you can reach out to me and Kurt and get some help, posted on school or whatever. But it's actually a part of the profession thing that you go through all the time is
Right.
that you're sort of stuck and you're trying to figure something out. And then the longer that goes, it really affects you. Like, I just need it to do this. I just need it to do this. And then you start to remember we've talked about the two states of every programmer. One is, okay, I'm a rock star. The other one is this dog turning around like, I have no idea what I'm doing. The longer that goes on, the more that you feel like you have no idea what you're doing. But then once you resolve it and like, oh, it wasn't my code, it was something out here that wasn't on or something, then you're like back on top of the hill. Like I am a programmer. I am
Right. And
feeling
then
awesome.
and then you'll go through those two states and you'll fix it and you'll test it and it works. And you're like, rah, I did it. I did it. I did it. You hear the crowd in the background screaming and yelling, applauding. And then you look at your data and you realize that there was about 3 things that you created that were good by fixing this one thing. You had 3 things, you created other problems, and so now you got to fix that. So it's almost like a water balloon where you squeeze it on one and it goes out the other side, and it turns into a mess sometimes. And then you go back to 0 again. So right, you're right. People on the outside of that, especially if you've been in this for a week or 10 days working on this thing, they might think you're schizophrenic, man. I mean, they might, you might have the symptoms of a sociopath by the time you're done.
So case in point, Kurt, we were working on a project, a Power Apps project together this week. And you sort of had the ball on that. And you were talking about like, oh, it works. No, it doesn't work. Yeah, it works. No, it doesn't. And it's sometimes it can feel like a roller coaster.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I feel like it's good to actually talk about these emotional highs and lows, so you don't think that you're crazy or like you're the only person. No, this is typical for people like us trying to get a computer to do what we want it to do with instructions.
Right. And then at the end of that, before you get it working, you're actually believing, like I actually thought, man, I don't even know how to spell Power Apps. Here I am trying to write a program in Power Apps. I can't even spell it, and then you fix it and you say, okay, I'm back to being I'm a genius. It's just funny how it works that way though.
Absolutely. What is PowerFX? Well, PowerFX is what Microsoft has called the language that we use here. In fact, I'm going to bring this over here. So they finally gave it a name, and now I think it's great news because what we're going to be finding is that this language that we are mastering in Power Apps, we can be using on other areas of the Power Platform. I find that to be great news. So I just wanted to at least mention that. Power. If you ever hear that, I want you all to know exactly what people are talking about when they say PowerFX. They're talking about the coding language that you use inside of Power Apps. Okay. And I'd like to go through some definitions, and I wanted to cover these things that you're going to learn no matter what type of platform that you're trying to pick up, like .NET or Python or PHP. And so the first one I have here is syntax.
Just real quick there before you jump in there, just a real quick comment there.
Sure.
Now that FX, now you guys, maybe you noticed, maybe you didn't, but that FX is the same window that you would put formulas in Excel, right? So you have that FX window. They're kind of giving you a clue, guys. Hey, Excel people, this is going to be very similar. Just wanted to throw that in there.
Absolutely. So we see that little FX, which is what you see in Excel, right?
Yeah.
So how apropos, right? How apropos. Somebody said it to me once. Apropos. I looked it up and I was having a hard time finding. I guess it's French for appropriate. So anyway, so syntax. What is syntax? So for any language that you're trying to pick up, what are the rules of that language? Okay, what are the rules? So first of all, let's put some examples in here that would apply to PowerFX. Okay, so try to indent that over there a little bit, and I think we lost the word there. Syntax. Okay. So one thing is that it's case sensitive. And with the advent of spell check, apparently my brain can't spell half the words anymore since I've grown reliant on that.
You are living proof that you don't have to know how to spell to be a computer programmer.
So, Kurt, what are some other examples of the syntax? I'm going to put in here.
Right. I like the way you said it. It's the rules, right? And I think I made a video a month or two ago talking about, look how easy this is. And in that, I talked about how people are thinking, there's a lot of people out there thinking about changing their jobs, wanting to do something different in their life, but then they feel overwhelmed and they feel like they can't do it. But if you take on any new job, you've got to learn the rules of the job. You got to learn the rules of where you're working at, and that's kind of what you're doing here. You're just learning the rules of your job here. And that's what syntax is. It's case sensitive. You've got to have commas in specific places. You've got to have semicolons at the end of every line. You have to have formulas have to have left and right parentheses around it. Records have to have curly braces. Can you type faster, Darren? Come on, man. I'm teasing. Let's see. What else is there?
Something I want to address, the semicolons. So that only, now we haven't gone down and talked about declarative versus imperative, okay? But you only include commas if it's imperative type of code, like a button on click, right? But the button fill, you would not have a semicolon there. And also, let's see, I'll put a dash in here, only for imperative.
Right, and you can only have one line, right? When you don't have the semicolon and those the declarative, right? The declarative.
Yeah, so declarative, it has to be evaluated down to. Of course, I'm sort of jumping ahead with even our verbiage here.
You kind of have to, though. You got to kind of go back and forth in it, right?
Okay, so the last line of code, it is optional. I don't know if you knew that, Kurt, but yeah, we got a bunch of lines of code and that semicolon. So if you only have one line of code and some imperative, so that semicolon there would be optional. What other languages use semicolons to mark the end of a line of code?
Pascal.
Can you think of one or two?
Pascal, right? C. Clipper,
C++,
C++, C++, C Sharp, all variations of C,
JavaScript.
Yeah. You see, that kind of comes from the old days. Now, some of you guys would never know this, but back in the old days, when I started programming, 32,000 bytes, 32K was huge. 32K was a monster computer. And you had literally, when you're writing your code, you literally didn't want to put the ch. Okay, the byte set for a line feed is char 13 plus a char 10. That's two. That's 2 bytes. Well, if you have 100 lines, that's 200 bytes your program just took up. So you had to have that semicolon in there. We put semicolons in there so that you didn't have to do a line feed, and you would just have one continuous line going. Now, I tell you what, one time I had to write a program that was dealing with bomb simulation that was written back in the 60s. And this thing had nothing but semicolons in there. And you had to try to write that code and change the code in that. That was so hard because you couldn't scatter the lines out. Thank goodness we have more memory now, right? But that's where that semicolon started at. It was so that we didn't have to do the char 10 plus the char 13.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
You've been around for a while, Kurt.
I've been around for a while. Yeah.
What about you just brought up parameters and you were throwing out all kinds of stuff, and I'm like, oh my goodness, and I wasn't typing fast enough. But you mentioned parameters, so now I got to go back.
Boy, parameters is a big topic, right? We could have a whole live feed on parameters, man.
Yeah. So I added in definition parameters and arguments. Can those do those two words mean the same thing? Can they be used interchangeably? Because chances are you might have heard those terms before. Go ahead.
Well, I think an argument could be a formula as well, right? And
Really? Okay.
And I guess a parameter could be too. So yeah, maybe they both are, but when I think of arguments, I think the left and right operands of an equation.
Uh-huh.
So
this is good stuff, Kurt. I'm really enjoying this this topic. Let's going over all this stuff.
Yeah.
What about operators?
Right.
Operators.
That's hey, look, that's part of syntax. That's part of syntax too, right? And order of operations, your operators and your order of operations. Now, the PowerFX language has taken away some operators that are in conventional languages, like the modulus operator. In C, C#, C++, Pascal, you would have a % sign be a modulus operator. Now in PowerFX, it's the modulus is a function. They put a mod function out there.
Yeah, I noticed that.
And then also, I like PowerFX the way they've done. They said, oh, you come from a C background? Oh, we'll use the bang operator for the not. And if you come from whatever other language it is, you put the NOT not in there, I think the same thing for the and, right? You could do the double ampersand for and.
For the and, absolutely. So something I would want to say about PowerFX here is that it flexible, coming from different backgrounds. I'm going to say in here multiple operators for same purpose. So in some cases, I feel like it is like coming from a Visual Basic background, using the word and, but if you're from a JavaScript or Java, C#, you're going to have 2 ampersands like that. There's multiple ways of doing things. So in a way, it makes it easy for people to come in, but in a way, it sort of makes it a little more difficult for maintainability. So if you have several developers or programmers working on the same program, and somebody gives me the program to support, maybe the person leaves the organization or is on vacation, I got to go in and look at and they use the bang operator instead of not. Maybe I've never seen that before. I'm not used to that. Or then I start coding and maybe start replacing their bang operators, the exclamation points, with what I prefer. And it just sort of like, well, there's different ways of doing it. Which one are we going to do? So a lot of times organizations will say, listen, these are our coding standards. we're never going to use the word and. We're always going to use two ampersands, or we're never going to use
Yeah.
or. We're going to use the pipes.
I remember because I'm considered a renegade programmer. I come from an engineering background, and I was a renegade where I would use a lot of mathematical shortcuts to get coding done, right? And I remember having a conversation with you, and of course, you've been spending a lot of time in the corporate world in the last 20 years. And so you worry a lot about the documentation and about how just what you just said. Somebody comes in there, they were using a bang operator, they come in there and start replacing the code. So you've actually been through those hornet's nests where you actually had good code got hacked up because somebody didn't know what to do. So, and then you had told me, you said, no, Kurt, you got to make sure that you write this code in a certain way. So, that bang operator may not be really good in certain circumstances. That might be important, to do that for documentation, So, I took that to heart. That's pretty good stuff right there, what you had said. So know your background. If you're working on if you're working with rocket science somewhere out there, and you're probably out there in the back room dealing with something, you're probably going to be more of a renegade type programmer. You don't have to worry so much about that. But when you're dealing with corporate meetings and you got teams of programmers that are working on one thing, boy, it's a whole nother animal. You got to really be careful of how you're writing your code. Yep.
Absolutely. Something that I even think, I'm just looking at the live stream comments. Data's King says comments are important for documentation purposes. So yeah. So what about commenting in code? There's different ways of doing this. I'm going to add that down
just
there.
as we were talking about, the way you code can be commenting as well, right? I mean, it's almost like self-commenting code if you do it right, if you do it nicely.
Self-documenting. Absolutely. Well, it's sort of like building an application. Do we need tons and tons of training, or do we build an interface that's highly intuitive and fun to use, maybe, and then still provide training, but perhaps we don't need so much training at that point.
That's right.
If we do it in a way that makes sense to most people.
That's self-evident. Yeah. I just wanted to say, just to shout out some of these guys some of these people that are out here. I see you guys, Michelle and Lou and Mente, Rosa, Data's King. Yep. Good morning, everybody.
Yeah. So let's see here. So Yar says coding shouldn't be a big deal from now on, and maybe what they mean from now on is like these days with all kinds of different levels of programming. You had low level stuff back in your day, Kurt, with assembler and C. And in my day, when I came in, it was a very high level language, VB6. And these days we have low code, no code stuff. Instead of learning how to code, I would start learning where to place ready-made codes generated by AI. Yeah, AI is really changing things up, isn't it?
Right. But you said so much there, Darren. Okay. So here's the thing. I came back I come up in an assembler from the assembler, which is several levels below. It's about 13 levels below where we're at with Power Apps at this point. But so then I remember people coming in the 90s learning how to program. Well, they didn't know computers without Windows, really, very, very much. So they didn't understand the assembler. So what happens if now today, if you're in Windows and all of a sudden they take Windows away from you? Well, then now and you're back to having to go to that low level language like maybe C or C++ or the assembler. And then later on, what happens if now we've got AI coming in? Well, AI will do the coding for us. What happens if you don't have AI? What happens if AI is not available to you at that moment and you got to get something done? So it's always good to know from that low level stuff, go down to that low level stuff and learn that because it's easier up here, and that way you're prepared for everything that's in there,
Yeah.
I guess I used to try to teach that too. Even when I was teaching Visual Basic, I used to teach it from a C++ aspect so that students would be able to take that and understand what's going on underneath the computer so that you could actually write code on notebook paper if you needed to, if you didn't have a computer around, because you know how that thing's going to operate.
Absolutely. And I think I actually saw Michelle in the comments mention something like that. She says, I love coding. LOL, I like to make things I write appear but I'm odd. So this was, I guess her comment made me think of you, Kurt. Like if let's say you were out and about and you didn't have your computer with you, but maybe you had a notebook. I could see you writing code just on paper, at least pseudocode. Oh, there's another term, pseudocode. What is pseudocode? Oh my goodness. This is good stuff.
We could have a whole live stream on pseudocode, man, and we should have a live stream on pseudocode.
How do you spell pseudocode?
I don't even know how to spell pseudocode.
I'm going to have Jeff tell me.
SEUDO.
EUDO.
There you go. There's pseudo and then hyphen code. Yep.
I've only got one thing to say to you, Jeff. I've got one thing to say to you. Show off.
Hey, there's been times you've asked me questions I wasn't sure either.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So tell me more about pseudocode, Kurt. I'm going to come back to logic here in a moment, but have you ever coded on paper? Do you find that useful?
Yeah. Okay. So pseudocode is great because at a low level, or I should say at a high level, you don't have to know really, it doesn't have to be appropriate syntax. It doesn't have to be appropriate syntax at all. Now there is a pseudocode language that is more appropriate for like just data design, where you're kind of like loosely talking about this thing, making a flow chart, but then at a high level, pseudocode just could be your own language. It could be your own lexicon, your own way of putting things. Like I need a loop here. I'm going to do a loop here. And you're going to set up a block that does a loop. You can set it up that way. That way you can lay out your puzzle a little bit before you get into the details of the syntax.
It sounds like you're describing brainstorming.
At a high level, it is. But then think of it as a funnel where you take your brainstorming pseudocode and turn it into a low level pseudocode, which is there's actually a pseudocode format where you could to deal with like meetings, with a bunch of programmers. First, you have meetings that have no programmers, and then you have meetings that have a team of programmers. Right. And the meeting with the team of programmers, you would actually write your pseudocode to be more syntax. You're closer to the syntax, right? Without actually lining out everything. Because let me tell you, if you get into C, C++, C#, and you know this, Darren, 100 lines of C# or C++, that could be an 8-hour-a-day job right there to lay out 100 lines. That could take a long time, depending on how tough that project is. Whereas pseudocode, you're just getting the concept out there, So defining the logic. You just had the definition logic. That's what pseudocode's for. It's defining the logic of your code.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Let me put that in here because I like that.
And I have been in places where I've actually had to write down notebook paper code. I've actually had to do that. So, because not only did I not have the tools with me, I didn't even have a computer with me, but I had to make sure I got something done. And I've actually had to help troubleshoot people, I think maybe even yourself a little bit sometimes back in the day, over the phone. You would be talking on the phone. Hold on. I got to figure that out. Let me write that down. Okay, type this in.
Well, guys, consider what you see up on the screen right now. You're seeing me sort of like this is my pseudo video. Like I'm writing out an outline or a structure of what I'm going to talk about. And there are some things in here that, let's say, how I've got nested bullet points that you see on the screen here. That could be an if statement.
It's true.
If, people in the comments want to talk about this, then we'll go into it. But if not, then we'll just ignore that part, That's
good stuff. That's good stuff.
So you're thinking about, so this could be like a pseudocode for the video. And then the video is, we're using the pseudocode to know all the different points to hit, same thing with the program. There's going to be hundreds and thousands of lines of code that you create. And you might think, if you had a time machine, go 6 months into the future and look at all the application that you wrote. Okay, well, that was 20,000 lines of code. If someone were to tell you at the beginning of the program, 20,000 lines, that sounds like Wow.
So what I hear you saying, Darren, is that it's a good thing this isn't a real live stream, because if this was a real live stream, we'd be talking about these things. But what we're doing now is we're just going to get ready for the real live stream. That's what we're doing right now.
That's true. Yeah, sort of. Yeah.
And it's also kind of what Jeff was saying. Jeff says, well, what I hear you saying is it's brainstorming. And yeah, that's exactly what we're doing. But then at the same time, we're taking it and he's typing stuff down and he's making it more, I don't know what, organized, more to form, you know? So yeah, we're doing that whole funnel right here, getting ready for a live stream.
So I found some phrasing I really like for logic. So we start talking about pseudocode. I'm going to step back and talk a little bit more about logic. And I found something here I really like. So I'm going to paste that in there. Logic is like the rules or instructions that tell the computer what to do. It's kind of like when you play a game and there's certain steps you have to follow to play correctly. Okay. In fact, I might, let's add another one there. So we might have things like, directions. Okay, this is more like a definition. What I'm going to do is do a dash and bring that up there.
Yeah, you don't know how many times I fought with the computer and said, well, the computer should have known that's what I wanted to type. You know, it should have known that's what I wanted.
To be AI, right?
Right. Be a mind reader. Come on, man. If you were a smart computer, and you know, that's why I try to tell people that everybody thinks that computers are so smart. Computers are the dumbest machines. They are absolutely stupid because they don't know anything until you tell it what to do. And it will do exactly what you tell it.
Exactly.
And maybe that's why I like computers so much, because they do exactly what I tell them to do. I can't ever get anybody to do what I would tell them to do. I can't never, you know, it's like herding cats. But computers, they do exactly what I tell it to do. Even if I tell it to do something wrong, it does it, you know? And then I get mad.
There's actually a joke or a meme about let's say when you're as it goes, or how it's phrased is, as your boyfriend or husband is a computer programmer, and you say, you know, go to the store and pick up a gallon of milk, and if they have eggs, grab 2 dozen. And the guy comes home with 2 dozen jugs of milk because they had eggs. I love it. It actually, being a coder, it will change your, and you're looking at it, the guy is like, well, if I was to follow her specifications exactly, she'd get a dozen, but hopefully
and you know what, though, that's so much me, man. You know, I always said in life, you got to beware of literal thinking people, man. Beware of literal thinking people. But you know what? The more I program, the more I get to be like that. I actually start thinking like that. That's what's scary.
What about as you're organizing things, let's say in your house, your personal life, it's like, oh, that should be a database table. Oh, that would be a one-to-many relationship.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Then somebody on the outside says, you're obviously not married.
Yeah. Oh, Chris brought in a term, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. So what are you dealing with? When I took my first computer class, and I think middle school or junior high, it's all about input, processing, and output, you know? And so there's actually a term in the field, garbage in, garbage out. So if you allow garbage to be input into the database, well, what are your reports going to look like? Garbage, you know, because you don't have good data.
And that's about data validation, right? And how do you validate data? With the stuff that we're talking about right up there. But, you know, now that we're throwing out GIGOs out here, I've never seen garbage in, garbage out as an acronym, but I guess it is a GIGO. So, you know, well, I'll just throw out MEGO, and we're going to have MEGO in there, right? Can we put in MEGO?
We probably should, which is, well, I can't even claim this. I think this is something that you told me. My eyes are glazed over. So when I worked with you, Kurt, sometimes you'd be talking about something that we needed to code, and you had a whiteboard in your office. You're like, okay, we need to do this and this. And you turn around and look at me, and I'm like, okay. And it's like, Darren, you're megoed out. I'm like, what?
You can just see the glaze on his eyes were so thick you could hardly see what color his eyes were. They were just Straight. Oh,
Yeah. So for the logic I have here, the first, I guess, example of logic is you have directions. Okay. So, just like in a game, a program has steps it follows. Sometimes it can go back and repeat steps, like spinning or spinning again in a board game, or it can skip some steps if certain things happen, like skipping a turn if you land on a certain spot. So that almost touches on something down here that we'll eventually get to, which is we've got branching and looping,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Chris Beffer says, so then computers are a reflection of its user, huh? So, you just put something out there, and this is now maybe I don't know how to word this. Okay, so that's not totally true. They are a reflection on the programmer, right?
Hmm.
Users are a completely different platform of people. Those are in programmers in the programming world, we consider users to be kind of like a lower life form. They're like, they're not as high on the existence platform as programmers are. So they're a reflection of the programmer, not the user.
Yeah.
So don't be a
Absolutely.
user, be a programmer.
Okay, so the second one that I have for logic is problem solving. So logic can be like a recipe to solve a problem. For example, imagine you have a mixed pile of Legos and you want them sorted by color. The logic or recipe might be pick up Lego, look at its color, and put it in its right pile. Then you have
Where,
yes, no. What's that?
where are you reading this stuff from? This is good stuff.
I've got my sources.
Okay.
No, I just so yeah, so I okay. I'm talking to my best buddy. A lot of times, Kurt, I tell people that you're my best buddy, but I've got somebody that's grown closer to me. His name's Chad. I mean, Chat GPT.
Look, I get it. I told everybody I'm never going to get married. I'm just going to ask Google lots of questions. So I get it. I totally understand.
Yeah. So yeah, I asked it for examples of logic that you encounter with programming, and these are excellent things that it brings up, and excellent examples. So on the yes, no, and computer logic often involves asking yes or no questions to make decisions. For example, is the Lego red? If yes, put it in the pile. If not, put it in another pile. Or you're going to be using that all the time in Power Apps. So you need to master that. And then we have things on here for special rules. Now, you ever heard of business logic? That's what we're talking about here. Okay. So there is logic that's dictated by the processes that the business has, how the business is run, and you actually need to implement those business rules or business logic in your application. So whenever somebody submits a form or enters this data, then their manager needs to be emailed. That would just be a business rule, business process that the program needs to account for.
Darren, a couple weeks ago, we were talking about internal audits and layered processed audits. Those would be another more examples of that business logic.
Okay. Yeah, almost any application that you write is going to have something, and it's really good to make sure you hone in on this when you're speaking with the end users, the stakeholders, when you're gathering the requirements. Is what business processes do you have that need to be automated in the middle of this? And sometimes when people are asking to write a program, they probably don't realize what you're capable of with the technologies that you have in your toolbox.
Right. I mean, we could be talking about HR applications. We could be talking about inventory applications, customer records, processes in production. I mean, there's all kinds of different things that can be, honed into a Power App to help organize your business. Right.
Absolutely.
You just touched on something that's really big here, man. maybe weeks ago, we talked about how you be careful about when you're pricing programs. So if you're a freelance programmer or whatever, because the program, after you get some specifications and you write the code, and then you go there and you deliver it to them, and then they go, oh, but we want this thing to do this and this and this, and so it balloons up, right? And so now the price gets, the biggest reason I think is what you just said right there. Most people, when they want these, they have the idea conceptualized to write in a program. They don't know what the technology is capable of. And so when you deliver them something, they get woke up to, oh my goodness, you mean this thing can do this? Oh, well, we need it to do this, this, and this, and this, which is a whole nother set of specifications than when you started with, right? So that you just hit it right there, Derek, because I've always kind of wanted to know what couldn't get the right words for that. And that's it right there. They just don't know the technology. Their imagination isn't alive yet until they see that technology going,
Yeah, absolutely. And that's on top of clients and customers being vague in their requirements and laser specific in their revision requests.
It goes along the same lines though, right? Because now that they know the technology, laser specific.
Get them visuals as soon as possible, because they start getting a lot of clarity and a lot of stuff to tell you once they start seeing visuals. You start to sketch up a screen. It's like, oh, well, how are they going to do that? Or how are they going to do X and Y? It's like, well, you never told me about X and Y. What's that? Oh, that's some other system we have to integrate with. And blah, blah. It's like, that's how the requirements come out most of the time, What about, what's evaluation? The word evaluation. So a lot of times I think of evaluation in terms of, let's say, a variable. Perhaps we should actually talk about what a variable is. How about that? Because that's very important to know. We're going to cover it more down below.
Yeah, especially in the conditional branching. And that's a good question that I have for you, Darren, because as a Power Apps expert, and I am not, I understand, like in the C programming language, if you have an evaluation going on and you have a left side of an and a right side of an and, if the left side is false, it won't even go over to the right side. It'll stop right there, which is important, because if you're doing stuff for General Motors and you're dealing with 5 million records, that little step right there could add up to a whole lot of machine language instructions. How does Power Apps evaluate? Does it do both sides of it before it comes up with a conclusion, or does it shut down as soon as it sees the first false? And maybe, do you know that?
I don't, but that's something that I'm trying to think how we could test that, because
we should
right now we see, the thing is, it's so, the PowerFX language is very declarative. Now we do have imperative places that we can put code that will run from top down, but even what I was thinking as a good test of that, Kurt, was, well, what I'll do is I'll create a function that returns a true or false value that will do something like display something on a screen, right? Can we create our own user-defined functions in Power Apps?
No.
Not yet.
No.
They're creating, and that's the one thing that I feel like is really missing. Now there's some workarounds that we've uncovered, and some new features coming out this year that Microsoft has announced. But even then, it seems like the way that you go about defining these user-defined functions, named, what do you call that? Named, I guess, are they calling it named functions, or named formulas? I think is what I've heard before. Yeah. But even that, you sort of defining the function declaratively. So does it? I don't know. So it's something that would be interesting to find out.
That's a big deal. Yeah.
So, okay. So what is a variable? It's something that can change, like an algebra, but it's in your program. And we'll talk more about, I guess I sort of said, okay, what is? Typically a variable will have a type. Okay. that will hold something like a number or a string. And whenever you hear the word Boolean, think yes, no, true, false type of values, either a 1 or a 0. There's only 2 values in there. It's binary. Okay. You could have a record as a variable type. You could have a collection, and then you have these, and a variable typically has scope. So we'll talk about scope a little bit down here, but I just wanted to touch on, before we talk about evaluation, is touch on what a variable is. Evaluation is,
can I hold on, Darren? Can I just jump in there about variables one time at a high level, just for some guys that are just learning how to do this. And what is, they're still lost on this variable types. What's he saying? Types, blah, blah. So what a variable, to me, the way I like to teach it is, a variable is like a bag. It's a container. It holds a value. And think of it like, what are you holding? You got to be careful what you're holding. Like, are you trying to hold water? Because if you're trying to carry water in a bucket, you better not put it in a paper bag, right? Water is not going to do very good in a paper bag. But a plastic bucket can handle water, and a plastic bucket could handle water and dirt and other things. So different types. You got the type is like, what kind of a carrying case are you putting in there? That's the type. Is it a paper bag, or is it a plastic bucket, or is it something different? So make sure that whatever you're trying to carry can that the container can hold that. Like I said, water and paper. Water's just going to go through it. It's not going to hold it, right? That's kind of what variables.
And also the word appropriate comes to mind as you were talking about there. So we could have a container that can hold something, a variable type that can hold a value, but it's still not appropriate for that. Okay, so let's say we had a paper bag that was really strong. It could hold water or some liquid. That it doesn't leak, but still is the best type for that. Okay, so for example, we could have a string variable that holds the number 88, but it's a numeric value. Well, you want to make sure that you turn it into a number, a numeric value 88, and put it into a variable, because the first time you put something in the variable, Power Apps will define that type based on what you try to put in it. And then if you try to put in a different type of value later on in the program, it's going to complain, or it's going to error out, or you're going to have some weird, unexpected result that might end up in a bug. Yeah.
And these days with Power Apps, you can get away with a lot more. So you could do stuff like putting the number 88 into a variable and maybe be able to get that. Remember back in the old days, even back when you were starting up programming, you had to make sure you declared that 88 had to either be a number first or a character 88 first. And then you did the typecasting into those different things, right? Before you could do it. But these days you could just kind of throw a number in there, and then you just got to say, well, which one was it? Did I mean that to be the number or the character? So, it's the same set of problems, but different, right?
Yeah. Kurt, I remember back in the day when we used to, write VB code, Visual Basic Code. There was something called option explicit, and it would force you to declare your variables before you use them. In PowerFX, you're saying, hey, this is a variable, this is the name, the very first time you put, so it's almost like you don't have you don't have to declare it. You declare it by using it, by putting a value into something.
Right.
But my first question when I was learning VB6 is turning that option on, option explicit. Why would I type that at the very top of my code file? Why would I want to tell the editor or the compiler to force me to define a variable? So just speaking back from VB6 days, if a student asked you that, what would you say? Why would you want to put in the code something that will force the compiler or the studio, the environment, the IDE to force you to do something?
Right. So in that case, it's important to be able to do that, because now you're treating it like it's a real robust language. It's so important to have a typed language. There's so many things, like some of these web languages that have come out since 2000. They're not typed. And you'll notice that they're going back to it now. You saw that Microsoft came out with this thing called TypeScript, which is basically saying, hey, we're going to make sure that this stuff is typed. Because what ends up happening, Darren, you know this, man. You get into a program, you can get away with it if it's just a little quick little app and you got 1 or 2 little variables in there that you got control over. But if this thing is going to have 5 or 6 screens and you got a lot of variables, maybe you got a dozen or more variables going on here, you can get this thing twisted in a lot of different directions. And when you're asking the editor to force you to put that to declare what type of variable it is and the names of the variables that you have, then you're saying, okay, make me do things right. Make me do things so that I don't get twisted up later down the road. You know, we've had some students here recently using global variables get in a mess because they lost track of a value in a global variable because it wasn't typed and it wasn't declared right, you know. So I don't know. Does that answer the question? I know sometimes I get going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I've learned is it says if you do things explicitly or do things in a certain way that don't seem all that efficient, but it seems more ordered, is that you save yourself tons of time later on because those things could end up as bugs, and bugs are sometimes can take a while to sort of figure out the source of the bug, recreating the bug, what's causing this bug to occur. You have no idea. So having that option explicit or forcing yourself to do something a certain way, there's a lot of things that you do in coding. So in order to avoid bugs, because as a program grows, even if you're the only programmer, you're going to be like, what's going on here? You know, you look at some of your code and it's like safeguards to ensure that you don't have bugs later on. And that's very valuable indeed. And you'll realize that after your first 1 or 2 programs is, oh my goodness, you know.
So it comes down to this, Darren. It comes down to having control, right? Having control of your program. And that's what you say, option explicit. When it's making you do that, it's saying take control of your program, man. I've said this a million times. This is a game. It's called Beat the Beast. And you got this beast of electronics sitting out there that doesn't know anything about it. And it's about harnessing the power of that electronics to do one task. And when you have control of that program, you're not lucking into anything. You know, you're lucking into things when you get in these values and you're putting values into these variables that aren't declared. Sometimes, man, you can just get things twisted up, and sometimes it'll work and sometimes it won't, but you're in luck. You're lucking into it. Never luck into anything. If as a computer programmer, the number one rule has to be for you guys is that you will be in control of your program at all times. And that means you know exactly what type of variable you have there. Go ahead, Darren.
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to tell people to really listen up to this because people pay big money for that right there. That's the same. Those word for word what he told me 25 years ago. I think it's now to 25 years ago. I remember you teaching me all this stuff, and it holds true.
It's more important today.
Yeah,
it's more important today because it's allowing you the applications that we use. People are talking about it here. It's the editors, they're not requiring us to do all of these things because they're making it easy for people. They're making it easy. But if you're going to be a purist, a fundamentalist in this thing, always have control, man. It's more important today than ever because now you can get away with a lot more than you could back then. You know? Yeah.
Absolutely. So evaluation is finding out the end value of something. That could be a variable or expression. Where assignment is sort of like these are typically 2 operations that you have with a variable. Either trying to find out the value of it. Let's say it's on the right side of an equal sign in most languages. And then assignment is you got the variable on the left side of the equal sign. You're putting something in that. So those are the 2 types of things that you're going to be doing with the variables. But it also applies to things like in the case of evaluating an expression or even a property of a control or an object, you know. So do you have anything to add to that, Kurt, with a evaluation versus assignment?
Well, I think later on we're going to have a lot to say about that, because I think that was my biggest wrinkle about going into Power Apps from a traditional. When you were showing me Power Apps and saying, "Hey, Kurt, take a look at this. Why don't you try this language here?" I almost threw this thing away about 100 times because of that very thing right there. And you kept telling me, "Kurt, you're thinking like a programmer. You got to stop thinking like a programmer and think like some, you know." And we're going to get into that a lot more later. Maybe you're going to do it now. I call it, you know what, you've got different terminology than I use. I guess I use it as it's almost like a passive. It's a passive assignment, right? It's passive because it just sits there dormant and just accepts values, instead of you declaring and saying A equals B plus C. A just sits out there and it just assumes the values of B plus C.
Yeah,
Totally
it's so yeah. If you guys that are watching here, if you are coming from a programmer background, there's going to be something that you will think that would make sense. Like, so I've got a label here called label 1. Okay, and I know it has a text property. In almost any other language, I could say hello world. Okay, I'll put my semicolon there.
Yeah.
Do I have any type of an error here? I see no error. I hit run, say hello. It doesn't happen. So guys, this is what makes a programmer want to chuck a tool like Power Apps. Is like, what? I mean, I almost expect an error there. That code does not run.
Yeah. No, it should be an error there. Yeah.
There should be.
I literally wanted to throw Power Apps away after seeing this. I didn't even want to deal with it. I said, this is a toy language. It doesn't even. You just got to rethink a little bit.
Yeah. So how you go about this differently is, okay, so this is a label here, and I want to have a variable here, and let's call this, let's just keep it simple. We'll talk about more about globals versus locals here in a bit, but I'm going to have a variable called global, what to say. Okay. And now I've got an error. So that is the variable I want to create. How do I create the variable? Well, by assigning a value to the variable that does not exist yet. Isn't that strange? And I would say most of you probably already know this. In order to put a value in a variable and also to declare it, which happens the first time, use the set function. Okay, so there's the variable. And what we'll say is hello, of course I can't spell, world. And of course, the semicolon there would be optional, but let's just, I go in here and okay, I've got on select for that label. That's not where I want that global variable. But you see, I don't have an error now because I declared it over here. Okay, so if I go over to text and put that variable there, now what's cool is you can evaluate the value of a variable by double clicking on it or selecting it all. It's going to tell me the data type, it's text, and what's inside, a blank.
I absolutely love this. This is so amazing. Boy, you talk about a beautiful thing right there.
Yeah. Yeah. So now if I run it, let's see if it actually works. Hello world. So Derek,
can you try to do something a little bit different just for people that maybe get confused with the variables part? Maybe
sure.
if you could try to type something in the left text box, and as you're typing in the left text box, it puts it in the right side over there.
Okay.
So it's the same thing that you were doing with the variable, but not using a variable. We're just assigning a property value from another property value.
Sure. And what I'm going to say in here in the hint text is type your name. Okay, as the hint text. Now, these two things are labeled. So I brought over a text input in order for them to type something in. So in the way of, saying hello, instead of saying hello world, we're going to say hello, and we're going to greet the person by their name. So after they type it in here, Now you see here, it's called text input 1. Now I'm going to copy that. Okay. Now over here, so you want to modify this text so it's not using even a variable, right? We're going to
Right. That's right.
actually refer to that control, which is text
Yeah.
input 1.
Yeah.
And we'll say dot text. They haven't typed anything yet, but we might want to. This little ampersand is what is called an operator. Okay, so an operator is sort of like a function that can take arguments. In this case, before and after it, it'll take those in, and that ampersand will splice together two things like a string. Okay, so we might have hello space, and then we might want to splice in a little exclamation point there as well. Okay. So right now it just says hello with, nothing is in there. So if we click on it, you notice there's nothing in there. But if I typed in Aaron, notice I don't have to click on a button now.
Look at that. Look at that. That's just how easy that is. But
that took me a while to understand. This thing that I just showed you guys as a programmer.
Me too.
This is the biggest thing that programmers have a problem with is thinking like a coder,
Yep. I'm just now getting to a point where I don't get tripped up on that anymore. But boy, I used to for the longest time. It's like, oh, yeah. I'm sure you remember many phone calls from me saying, Darren, what the heck's going on?
Yeah. Okay. So what's the difference between a declarative and imperative coding? And in fact, I'll actually say this, coding. Okay. So declarative type of coding. Okay. So here, what is being displayed in a label is put in this text, this property called text. Okay. And you see it right here. It's just text. So this is that is declarative type of code. Okay. And you got a specific place to put it. Okay. So we click on a control, we select a property, and then we declare what that value should be. Now, what you're declaring doesn't have to be a literal value that doesn't change or a constant. It could be a variable that changes. And in fact, I just thought of another keyword that we should talk about here when dealing with coding is a literal value.
Yeah, string literals or numeric literals. Yeah.
Yeah. So a literal value, it could be a different type, but so an example of a literal value is that. So I think of literal as opposed to a variable, something that changes.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you'll notice a literal string has got to have quotes around it. Anything that's in between double quotes, that's going to be a literal string. It's literally whatever you type between those two quotes. And that's why, it comes from this, I say this, with that means I'm quoting. And that's exactly what you're doing there. You're quoting.
Yeah.
Now numeric literals don't need a string, in fact, or the quotes, but they still are just hard pressed in there. So if you put the number 2 in there, it's always going to be the number 2.
Yeah. Okay. So what about this code right here? Is this declarative or imperative? I mean, it's a question for the viewers, but Kurt, what would you say? Is this imperative or declarative?
I'm going to say it's declarative.
It is declarative. And what determines if something, the code here is imperative or declarative? Well, if we're talking about a property of a control or of an object or a component or something, these properties themselves will determine if it's imperative or declarative. So the text property, whatever you put in here, will always be declarative. You never need a semicolon to end. In fact, if I put a semicolon in there, it's going to complain about it. Okay. So if I go over there and like, what? I was told that you should always put a semicolon at the end of your code. No, that's for imperative type of coding. Okay. So a button has most of the properties that you encounter are going to be declarative in Power Apps. Now, for a button, there's one exception. That's on select. Okay, this area here, we could have 100 lines of code. We could have 1,000 lines of code. Now, you could have 1,000 lines of code here, but it would all be in one line that would evaluate to a one value.
Yeah.
Right.
So another way, I'm still trying to get my mind wrapped around your imperative and declarative. I guess declarative is going to be, or I'm sorry, imperative is going to be more like an action type thing where you're going to go do something. Whereas declarative is where you're going to be assigning a value to something, right? So if you're assigning a value, then you don't do semicolons. You can't do semicolons. But if you are going to go do something, you must have semicolons if it's more than one thing.
Yes. And just by you sort of clarifying that with me here, Kurt, I thought imperative, think taking action.
Taking action.
Declarative, just think of information.
Yeah.
And maybe I should say singular information.
So back in the old days, it used to be properties and methods, right?
Yes.
You had properties and methods. And I used to describe it as properties. Properties are like the nouns. They're the nouns. And it tells you what the thing's going to look like. And then you got the adjectives, which tells you what the thing's going to do. And that's going to be your methods, right? Your actions. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've talked about that. Now let's talk about other things that have imperative type of places. So most of the expressions in the code that you put in here are going to be declarative. I would say maybe 1% of things is.
Would it be safe to say that you have to have the word on or the on in front of the property value? So if you have a property list of values, anything that's got an on in front of it is going to be the imperative.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Kurt. I never really thought about that or connected those dots, but you're absolutely right. Because the first thing I'm thinking is the app on start.
On start.
On start.
On start, we're going to go do something.
Yeah, so that's where you're going to put your code that starts whenever your application starts, right? And
in the old days, those would be considered events, right? Those would be considered events.
We would call them events. Or event type of code. You'd have a C#. You would call those delegates, or a callback function. Sometimes they're called that. So when something happens, like when a user clicks on it, I'm going to go call back something over here that's going to be invoked whenever the user does that. So it's an event. So for screens, you got tons of properties, but you have an on visible and an on hidden. So almost every button, every control that you might work with, let's say a checkbox, or a toggle, you've got
everything
stuff.
Visual.
Or even a drop down's got an on select. What was that?
Everything visual is going to have an on visible, or right?
You have an on check, on uncheck, and an on select. The screens will have on visible, on hidden. Now, what would you say, Kurt, should be in an on visible, and what type of code would you put in on hidden? What would you say would be a good thing to keep in mind while working with those two?
So those are going to be very important events, or what do you want to call? I guess we're going to call them events for now. Those are going to be very important in the future when we're dealing with variables, because on visible is where you're going to be doing screen initialization. Before your screen becomes alive, you want to initialize values. You want to have certain values set at the beginning state. Or maybe you have certain objects that you want to have at a specific state. Or maybe you want to have data retrieval come in before that thing happens. That's all going to be done in the on visible. But then if you have control of your program, and if you're doing things correctly, you're going to have the on hidden is going to be cleaning up. See, there's a principle I just want to push out here. People pay big money for this, guy. So listen to this now. So it's really important to leave an environment the same way that you saw it when you came in. So when you come into an environment, you're going to make changes to that environment. So as a programmer, it's really important to leave that environment back when the way it was when you came in, right? So clean up your mess, basically. Always clean up your mess.
I think they teach that in the Boy Scouts too. When you
They
go out to
do.
a campsite and you have a fire pit, and before you leave the site, you leave it in a better
Yeah,
state than you found. I think that's
that's right.
a
That
good
is.
motto to live by, right?
This might be the second most important thing next to make your bed when you get up in the morning. Those two things right there.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, you made an excellent point, Kurt. If you see a property says on, chances are it's an imperative type of place that you put your code there. That will be imperative. That will actually run when something happens. Absolutely.
It's funny you asked me what it was before you said that. I didn't know, right? And you said, well, which one is that, Kurt? You gave me two options. That means I had a 50% chance of being right. But in my life, that usually means I had a 25% chance of being right. And I actually got it right. So that means I'm doing okay today because I had no idea really.
It's part of being a programmer, right? And some days you don't
Yeah.
feel like you have any idea what you're doing. And then some days you feel like you're a rock star.
Well, you're teaching me some things here, man. So.
What's the opposite of literal in coding versus like a variable, but
Talk about like implicit, maybe implied, maybe no. Well, be variable, literal and variable,
yeah,
right? Variable.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Literal and
What
variable.
about now? We don't have constants in Power Apps. Kurt, tell us what a constant
Really?
is in other languages. Yeah, we don't have constants in.
That's kind of interesting. Yeah.
You can create constants by creating so like your enumerated values, but really what you're doing is you're creating a record type of value and refer to it. I use that a lot in my app OnStar to create some values that I want to refer to. And I would say whatever I named the variable dot, and I've got a bunch of properties that pop up in the IntelliSense. Yeah. So sort of a trick that I use a workaround to create my own constants. But what is a constant? Why are they good and what are they used for?
Well, I think constants are not as important today as they were back in the old days. A constant is a value that never changes, right? It's a value that you're going to use in your program that never changes. Maybe in my day, it used to be maybe it's going to be a maximum number of lists. Maybe you have a top 10 list. So you would have a constant at 10. You'd put a constant up there at 10. That's never going to change, right? And the reason why it's important is because a constant is going to be resolved at compile time, whereas a variable is going to be is resolved at runtime, which I know that might be saying a lot for somebody that doesn't really have a lot of experience programming. But back in the old days, we had compilers, and if your machine is slower than they are today, you don't have to resolve that. You resolve those things when you're compiling your program. So that way it's resolved one time forever. And now whenever you're running that program, it doesn't have to think about it. The machine doesn't have to spend any time thinking about what that number was. But when you're dealing with a variable, well, now you got to go out there and you got to get some memory. You got to allocate some memory. You got to define what kind of type it is, how big it is. Then you got to go and you got to put stuff into the math register. If you're going to add something to it, you're going to have to move things into registers. You got to put things in and output things. And so now it's taking a lot of machine instructions when you're dealing with a variable. So constants are very cheap and very efficient, and variables are not. There you have it.
I liked everything that you said. I'd sort of like to step back and ask you, Kurt, what is a compiler? You know what I mean? So here we are. We're taking on Power Apps, learning Power Apps. Like, okay, now I'm going to learn all the coding nomenclature and concepts and be a good coder. And you just threw out a word compile or compiler and started talking about efficiency and this and that. What do you mean compiler?
Isn't that amazing? It's so amazing. There's probably a lot of people that don't even know what compilers are now, but they're still there. They're still important too. They're still very important. But in fact, you are using a variation of a compiled language now when you're dealing with Power Apps, but it's more interpreted now. So what is a compiler? It's that thing that when you get done writing your program, you're converting it in from human type language. Like we see if, and of course, some of you guys are learning how to program. You're looking at Power Apps saying, this don't look like human language. But it's not base 16. It's not hexadecimal stuff. It's not zeros and ones, right? So you're taking that human language that we use and it interprets it down. It goes through an interpretation, right? It goes into an interpretation. It breaks it down to hexadecimal numbers. And the reason why we use hexadecimal numbers is because it allows us to put large amounts of numbers that are really big into a small amount of space. So that's why we take human language and we convert it down to an assembler. We call that an assembler. It goes to an assembler state. So it assembles it down. And then it compiles it from an assembler. Once it resolves all those things into hexadecimal, because now it's dealing with a number. We went from these wordy language like if, and I don't know, all these different words that you're seeing with Power Apps, right? And then you go down to those assemblers, and then it goes into a compiler, which breaks it down to zeros and ones, which now the kernel of your machine can actually interpret and run. And that's what it needs to do. All computers are operating on zeros and ones and at a very low level underneath the BIOS at a kernel. Okay. So we are at the kernel. You go from the kernel, you go to the assembler. From the assembler, you go to a low level language format. Then you go into like what we're dealing with here. Now we're dealing with Windows, which has, you go from the low level format to an operating system. Then you go up to the Windows. Now you go to a browser. Now you go to the middleware in between the browser. Now you go to the Power Apps platform. And then you got your language. So now we're about 15 levels up from that compiler. All that stuff's happening every time you run a code. Every time you run anything in there, it's going through that whole process because all things have to get down to that kernel so that it can be displayed on your monitor, right? So when you compile code, it's making it run really, really fast. These days, you have an interpreter. These interpreters are made so that any kind of browser, any kind of language, a Macintosh, Windows 11, Windows Vista, maybe, can all operate off of the same browser. They have these interpreters. They have these engines. They can actually interpret this code. So I don't know. That was me trying to go really fast on what a compiler is. The short answer is this: when you get done typing your code, you push compile, and then you go out and play hack-a-sack for about 20 minutes. That's what we used to do back in the old days.
Yeah, if your boss caught you goofing off in the hallway or talking to people being social, or having little sword fights, it's like you look at your boss like, hey, my program's compiling right now. Like, okay, carry on. So you can't really do anything while it's compiling. So it would take all your code. Yeah.
It used to take, sometimes it would take hours to compile your code. Hours. And so if you had one bug in that code, one line of code, if you forgot a semicolon, and you get 45 minutes in that thing and it hits it, boom, it dies. Your compile dies, and you got to go back and start all over again, man. Yeah. And so it's, boy, it used to be nerve-wracking. So much easier.
So Gert, are Power Apps applications compiled?
No.
So instead of compiled, would you say interpreted?
Yeah. Yep.
You got a lot of layers. I mean, you went over a lot of them. I mean, even while you're going through them, I was like, well, there's the DOM, the JavaScript or the browser, the HTML document DOM, which is short for document object model. You've got all these things that are going through, and then the browser has its, and each browser has got, they're supposed to be on the same standards, and be rendering things the same way. But there's a lot going on. So it's not really compiled. Your code that you write is not compiled down to zeros and ones, but the browsers have been compiled. The application that you can find in the App Store, Power Apps. You can download Power Apps onto your device. It doesn't have to be Windows. It could be, iOS. It could be Android or Windows. That program more than likely is compiled down to zeros and ones for that particular operating system that it's been compiled for that particular platform. But then your code is interpreted by the host. And I have a whole video on what the host is and using the host object. But I think what we do have that is similar to this in a way, well, back in VB6, we would just hit the run button, right? And we just run the program. It wouldn't, did it compile it back then? So hitting the play button in our Power Apps, it sort of compiles it in a way, right? Or at least it runs it. Yeah.
it actually did compile it down to an assembler. And then it had an interpreter that ran it. You know, back in the old days, GW Basic and all those basic, they had interpreters as well, and they worked off just as fast. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So runtime versus design time. So whenever you're in Power Apps, I don't know that this is an official term of like when we're here. This is what I call it, and I've sort of borrowed it from back in the day when you taught me VB6, where you had your code, you're designing things, you have a design surface and code, but when you wanted it to run, before you hit run, you're in design time. When you hit the run button, you're in run time. So it's sort of interesting how it all works. I guess another thing that I have found really strange coming from a programmer background is that, I mean, if I were to go in here on the screen on visible and I'll write some imperative type of code that says something like notify, we'll say, oops, you know, I can actually give it whatever the name of the screen is, for example, app.activescreen.name. Okay. And I could select all, copy, go to screen 2, go to the on visible, paste that code there. Now, so I've got code. I've got imperative code there. I'm in design time. I'm not holding down the Alt key with my my left hand. I'm going to click on screen 1. Oh, look at that. Notify just executed. Kurt, do you find that weird coming from a programmer background that we're in design mode and our imperative code is being run for us?
It's awesome, isn't it? I love it. It's that what I see it is it's giving me a window to the runtime, right? So, you know, design time versus runtime. Design time just means you're assigning values while you're designing your screen, right? And runtime means the values are going to get assigned while you're running. And they're actually giving us a preview of what it might look like if you put values in there, you know, if you put different values in there. Now, maybe it can't do that all the time, right, Darren? I don't know. You know more about this than I do, I think, at this point. Is that if it saw the name at design time, it saw your app.activescreen.name, and it went out there and it grabbed it and it saw there was a value that was clear to it, so it put it out there. But if it didn't have a value, say you were doing a count on the database table, well, no, that they would know that too. But let's say maybe you're doing a filter on a count on a database table. It would say, oh, I don't know that. I don't know what it is yet because I got variables in there. I can't do it. So it wouldn't be able to display it, would it? Maybe.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, it's like there's like a preprocessor going on that's always running, right? That is looking at, okay, they're using, like if I try to use a variable, like I was here a little while ago, I had a variable in there, and then over here I declared it. So I had an error there when I was trying to use that variable when I didn't have any set. And then once I go over here, it's like it resolved that error while I was coding over there. So there's something going and looking. The ever watchful eye of Power Apps Studio is looking at anything that you're changing. And then it's like running all the code to see if everything is in harmony or not in harmony. You know, you could have 10 errors and you could go in and do one little thing and resolve all 10 errors. You know, what were you saying?
True. I was just going to say, just looking over here at the comments, it looked like Michelle says, is it only me who feels these guys are way, way above me? Oh, gracious. You know, I hope not. I hope that we're not way above you. I think we're not. I guess I just want to say to everybody, if you're still kind of new at this, Jeff, you're in the same kind of boat here. If just kind of sit back and just relax and just absorb what we're saying. Don't try to understand everything in that exact moment. Just kind of try to just say it's going to come to you. You're going to see it. We are talking, in some cases, we might be talking above you, but then we're going to be dropping down into the low levels here at some point and teaching the real basics, you know? So sometimes you kind of got to be exposed to the language, and it seems like it's a lot, but once you get exposed to that, the next time you hear it, it's not going to be so bad, you know? So just kind of wanted to put that out there like that.
So what I hear you saying is you're going to teach it in whole, part, whole. Like right now you're doing the whole, you'll break it down into parts and do that next, and then go back to the whole, and that will make more sense.
Good stuff, Jeff. That was very well put. I don't even think Darren could have put it better than that. Maybe. Hello, Ron. How you doing?
Hey, Ron.
Glad to see Ron made it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the only thing that we've talked about in the last few minutes that, in my mind, maybe if I heard it for the first time, might be overwhelming, is the whole compiler thing, because it's like maybe that's the first time you've ever heard of that. But it's this whole coding thing is easy if you've never heard a word before to think, oh, they're speaking some esoteric thing that I won't be able to understand. No, it's just a matter of, if you hear a word that you don't know the definition to, if you go look it up, it's gonna just help you better understand things. And
okay, hold on. I've got to go look up esoteric. Hold on, I've got to look it up.
Oh, okay.
I'm just messing with you there.
Yeah. So, that's what I found is, if I'm learning something new and I just got this sense that I'm just not getting it, I'll look for words and descriptions that I was trying to take and trying to process. So that's why I wanted to talk more specifically about what a compiler is, because I feel like that was a term that was thrown out that maybe people aren't familiar with, So let's go back to our list here. Okay, variables. Yeah, so we've talked a little bit about what variables are up here in the definition, and they've got types and they have scope. Okay, so we have either global or a local variable. The scope is, where is that variable good for? Okay, so a global variable, if we define like we did here for this button here, we declared a variable. That's the name of our variable. And you can see GBL, which is I'm trying to identify what type or what scope that variable is. Okay, it's global. And global means it can be accessed anywhere in your application. Okay, whereas the other type of variables is called a local, and you use a completely different type of variable in that case. Okay, so if I were to make a copy of this button here, you actually use a completely different function, and it's called update context. Okay, and that will make it a local variable. Now, you always prefix your local variables with LOC. These are Microsoft recommended best practices, and a GBL for global. Okay, now the update context does not work the same way, doesn't have the same syntax, doesn't have the same rules to use it. There's something that you need to add in here, which is a curly brace. And at first, when you're learning variables and local variables, you're like, okay, I don't know why we have to put curly braces in there, but I'll go ahead and do it. And you also find, if I open up this coding window a little more, and you know what, I'll just try to zoom in here so you guys can see the code a little better. Okay, so we put these curly braces in, and it's still not happy. Okay, so what did we do before when we used the set function? Was we used a comma and then the value we want to put in. Well, that doesn't work here with the update context. You need to use a colon. Okay, not a semicolon, but a colon. And that will work. Now that we have that code out there, it has defined that local variable. Now, how is it that the scope, or what's the difference between a local and a global? It's the scope. And the scope of a local variable is one particular screen. So if you think of your program or your application as a house, think of a screen like a room inside that house. So if we were sitting in someone's bedroom, and you were talking to someone in the room and said, "Hey, could you get the remote control to the TV? It's in the closet." They're not going to go look in the closet in a different bedroom. They think that you're talking about the scope in which you're in, the context in which you are in, which is in the room that you're sitting on. You're inside with this other person. Well, in Power Apps, you go into a room, but you go into a particular screen. Well, what screen is the user on? Okay, so that variable, that LOC, what to say, okay, would be referenced on this screen and not outside that screen. Now, a different screen or a different bedroom could have the same exact name, but those things would be separate. Okay. So when I say, hey, the umbrella's in the closet, if we go into a different bedroom and they're like, oh, the umbrella's in the closet, right? Like you told me a few minutes ago in the other room, like, well, not this closet, and maybe it looks exactly the same, but you open up and there's different contents. It's exactly what's you can think of as local variables. Okay. So what we could do here is we could have, let's say, let me have a different label here. Okay. And what I'll do is have this go into this. Okay. So right now there's nothing in there. Okay. So that's the update contact. Now I'm going to copy both of these. For the first one, I'll do, we'll go back and actually use that set GBL, what to say, hello world from global. Okay. And then I'll use that variable. Oh, Kurt's back there. Let me bring him back in. So Kurt, I'm just sort of going over the difference between a global and a local variable using the set keyword and the update context. And those two functions are really different, aren't they?
They are.
Would you agree with that statement?
I would totally agree.
And here I'm going to say from a local. Okay, and I probably need to make these things a little bigger. Let's see. I didn't want to have ideas. Let's make these a little taller. Okay, and then I'll do this. Okay, so we've got two different values. One's looking at the global, one's looking at the local there. Now, I could, what I think I'd like to do here is, and we're putting this value in here. Well, let's just add in a little date timestamp. We'll say now. So we know when the value was put in there. Okay.
Okay.
And we'll do the same thing for both of them. Right. So I'm going to run it, hit this button, hit that button. Okay. Maybe hit this one again. So it has a different value there. Now you notice it's showing the hour and the minute, but it's not showing the second. So what I could do, yeah, throw a little text function around there, so I could say hour, minute, second. That's probably a better way of doing that. Mm-hmm. So we can actually see that and be more meaningful for our purposes. I'll run it. I'll hit this. So there we go. There's the second. Okay. Now, what I wanted to do to sort of illustrate this point, drive the point home, is I'm going to go over to screen 2 and paste all these controls here. And what do we have? We have this this label showing us the contents of the global variable that was set on a different screen. And then on this screen, this label is going to be looking at this local variable, but look at it. I selected it. It's text and it's blank, hasn't been set yet, because those values, even though we're using the same variable name on two different screens that are local variables, they're separate values. There's separate points in memory. Okay. So now if I run this, I hold down Alt and I click on this button here. You see that it says 3907. We go back to screen 1. See, it's retaining the original value there. Okay. So Ron and Jeff, what do you think of that?
I like it.
Like it?
No, I think it's well, I mean, when you're looking at the difference between local and global, that's just phenomenal, because all of a sudden now it opens up a whole new door. I I find that just absolutely fascinating. I haven't got that far yet, and so just seeing that is just phenomenal. I love it.
Very
Well,
good.
I think a better way of saying, instead of opening up a door, maybe it opens up a Pandora's box is what it does. Because global variables can be very, very dangerous, man. Very dangerous, especially to big systems. Now, little programs, it's not a big deal, but usually little programs, you don't need too many global variables. But, I don't want to get above everybody's head in this, but there's a great saying that says, who needs parameters when you have global variables? Just
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So go ahead.
there's one other thing, and I don't know. Maybe it's just because I'm a neophyte at Power Apps myself, but it seems like if I'm using a navigate function and I institute a variable, I can pass in a variable along with my navigate. That variable is not seen before I do the navigate, right? But then after I do the navigate, then it sees it.
Yeah.
That gets into some tricky stuff there. Tricky stuff.
Yeah. So just to demonstrate this, so I pass parameters. I actually pass local variables into a different screen that I'm going to. And I've learned this from all the ASP.NET and web development that I've done. Is you don't want the new screen to have to go look up something in a database or something. Just pass it as an argument or a parameter into that screen. And so, for example, I'm going to say navigate. This is how I would do that. And we're going to say, well, we'll go off to screen 2. Okay. And then there are some other parameters here. So I might say something like, well, the screen transition. Okay. Let's just say fade, which is my favorite one. But the third parameter is a place where we can pass local variables into that. Okay. So in this case, we could pass a parameter like screen from. And inside that little, so we're almost creating these little local variables for the screen we're going to, so it's sort of weird. By using these curly braces like this, we could actually say app dot active screen dot name and actually pass what it's coming in from, because we could have a new screen and we could have a screen 3. So screen 2 could be gotten to from screen 3, right? But if we use this button here, okay, it's going to go to screen 2 and it's going to have that, okay, that little local variable. Okay, now we're on screen 2. The question is, what's in that little local variable that was passed in? Put a little label on here, paste that there. Go, screen 1, came from screen 1. All right. So that's how you could pass something in there like that. Okay. Now, the next topic that I want to cover is commenting your code. Okay. So when you've got some code, it could be declarative or imperative, but especially imperative, because imperative code typically can go on for dozens or hundreds or sometimes thousands of lines of code, depending upon how complex it is. Now, on a platform like Power Apps, you have thousands of lines of code within one block. We're probably talking about the app on start event. If anything, if it's not, then I'm like, what are you doing there? You might want to break that up somehow, but you have 2 ways of adding code comments. Okay. So the first way is to do 2 forward slashes, and then everything here is a comment. Okay. And a lot of times when I'm trying to make my code look really pretty, I'll do these 2 forward slashes and maybe do some lines here, and then I'll copy that, and then I'll go down here. So I, in effect, create a code block. Okay. Now, there actually is a little bit better of a way to create a code block. If you want comments that go on for lines and lines, okay, you would do a /*. Now, this is similar. Both of these ways how you do comments is very similar how you would do it in C++, and I believe JavaScript, a lot of the other languages. So then you would have a star / and then everything in between here is a comment itself, and it's all in that green color. So what do you guys think of that? You guys think that would be really useful to put comments in your code?
Yes.
The / is the two of them together. That actually stops. In other words, then that holds that, right? And then it turns green. If I understood this before when Kurt and I were talking, what it does, it holds that code. In other words, then it's not going to erase it or let it go or even read it. It just holds it, right? Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Right.
That's a great point, Ron. And it's something that I use. That's actually not what I told you guys about. So a lot of times if I've got a line of code here and I want to get rid of it, instead of deleting, I hate to delete code because maybe a few minutes later it's like, actually, I do want that code. I'll just do 2 / and this is called commenting out your code.
Gosh,
so
dang
the
it, you guys,
compiler,
stealing my thunder here.
the compiler or the interpreter isn't going to read that code. It's going to ignore that code. But you as the programmer, you can still see it here,
Right.
and you can uncomment it out. And yeah. So what were you saying, Kurt? I know you were sharing a thought there.
I was just saying, you guys are stealing my thunder. I was going to wait, and then Ron jumped out there and talked about something that wasn't even because I was going to say the next best thing to that code block is being able to comment out running code that you have going. And of course, Ron saw us do that because I was showing him how to do something in his app one day, not last week or something. But yeah, you're right. That is so cool. It's a great debugging tool, right? It's a great debugging tool. And I love what you said there. Don't ever erase code. Don't go out there. You got this block of code that you wrote and you probably spent maybe an hour working on getting that code right. And then you go out there and you erase it because it's not working right. And you do something different. And then you maybe some of it you needed. Maybe some of it you wanted to get back in there, or maybe your new idea to fix it didn't work. So you want to go back to the old one, until you figure it out. Don't erase your code, man, until at least the next day or so. There's a time when you got to go do some code cleanup and get rid of your garbage that you got out there. But yeah.
Absolutely. Good stuff.
Oh, also, Darren, also show them how you could comment out half of a line so that you can get, like, if you're trying to figure out, you're trying to debug something, you can comment out part of a line so that way you can break it down into separate segments so that you can make sure that each segment is working.
Yeah. So if you wanted, let's say you wanted some code on the left side to be active and everything on the right side to be commented out, you would just use it right there. Okay. And a lot of times, like if I wanted to change something, I'll just keep it, comment that out, and then put something else in here just to try something out. Like you're debugging or troubleshooting something. Like, let me try that out. And really, this is all one line of code. So if I removed the formatting, of course, a comment sort of messes with the commenting, but this is all could be one line here.
Yeah.
And I could have been, well, of course, it doesn't like that because everything to the right of that. So you almost have to make sure it's on another line of code or another physical line. Although, so that's a weird thing that I find myself struggling with is one line of code. Okay. So we could have all of this on literally one line of code, right? Or we can format this text. Well, Kurt, is this one line of code or is this 5 lines of code?
It should be one line of code.
Yeah. So if you're talking to a programmer and there's 100 pages of code there, 100 pages, so you're like, well, how many lines on one page? I don't know, 50, 60, 80, I don't know. And then you multiply that by 100. Oh, that's how many lines of code. No, you could have 100 lines of 100 pages of code be one line of code.
You just got to look at the semicolon.
So programmers sometimes thinks about a compiler and it would look for a semicolon. It could be all one line. You could fit everything on one line. It would be compiled and be interpreted or executed as one line. But if you're talking about like the physical lines in an editor, this is 5 lines, but it's executed as one line. So sometimes when you're talking to a programmer, they'd call this one line of code. So I just wanted to make that really clear. It's so ubiquitous to me, but I need to think to make that distinction here.
It's
Yeah.
true. It's a good point.
Keep an eye
So
on
to
the
the double
comment.
dash, the double or double slash, the double forward slash, white space matters, right?
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah, it does. So you could have some code right here, you know, but if I had that same code down here, it would not be interpreted because, you know, these two forward slashes just work on that line right there. Yeah. So let's go back to our outline. We got lots of really good things to talk about. Order of operations.
Mhm. Yep.
Now this goes back to if everybody has taken some like an algebra class, you dealt with order of operations there. So if you have an expression where there's arithmetic in there, okay, so you got some addition and you have some multiplication. So that expression, when it's evaluated, could be two different numbers based on what happens first, either the addition or the multiplication. So, Kurt, what would happen first if we had addition and multiplication?
Let's see if I remember right. Isn't it the multiplication goes first, right?
Yeah.
And then the addition. Now, so it would be multiply, divide, and add, subtract. They would be left to right. So multiply, divide reads left to right. Order of operations left to right. Add, subtract would be below the multiply, divide, and then all of that gets superseded by parentheses, right?
That's right. So it's a great point here. So
It's been a
this is
long time since I had that.
exact same in math. Okay. So when you're evaluating an expression, the compiler and you, as you're looking at the code, you say, okay, well, multiplication and division will always happen before addition and subtraction. Okay. So these are examples. So this also applies to other things as well, other operators. Okay. And there's a lot of operators, not just math operators. Okay. So how you override the order in which it's being operated on is that you can use parentheses. So if we put some parentheses around the 5 plus 6, that's going to be 11. 11 times 10 is what, 110?
110. 110. Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Good stuff.
So I mean, you see how much of a difference that makes, right? The order of operations makes a world of difference. So if something's not happening right, and you have an expression somewhere, and that could be a declarative or imperative type of code in which that happens, you see how the order of operations can really have an effect on that.
Right. So you'll notice also, just really quick in that you have with your operation, with each operation, you have a left and a right operand, right? So in the above one, you had the 6 times 10. That was the left operand against the right operand. And then in the bottom one, you had 5 plus 6 turns in, when you put the parentheses around that turns into the left operand times the right operand. Okay. So see how that works in that you're grouping. Those two operands become very important later on when we're doing conditional branching. Okay. When you're evaluating an and or an or. And you're still going to use parentheses in those places too sometimes. We'll talk about that later on too. But yeah, that's really good stuff right there, Darren.
Okay, typecasting and formatting. Well, you guys just saw an example of me using typecasting, and we sort of used a thing that a lot of times you think of as formatting. We use a function called text, and then we could use another function called value. So let's go back over to our Power Apps Studio and actually show an example of this. So over here we have got, when we actually put the value into the variable, go over here to on select. Okay, I'm going to format this text here. We used a function called text, and I'll put this over here. And text will take something and it can either format it, but the end result is going to be text. Okay. So And then if you want to take text and turn it into a number, okay, which is important for you as you develop apps, because okay, so we have a text input here, and whatever they type in here, we can go over here to the properties. Let me make sure I'm not covering anything up here. The format for this text input, I can change his number. So if they try to go in here, and of course I got something else covering this up. Okay, so let me move this up a little bit. And I try to type in my name or some characters, it's not going to allow me because we've told it to only accept numbers. Well, let's say we put some numbers in here, okay? And then we try to get at that. Okay, so this text input 2, and put another button down here. And I can reference it. Text. Now we could do a notify, do something with it. But look, it's a typed text, but they entered a number, and we need to store that in, let's say, numeric field in the database, or we need to do math with it right now. Let's say we're creating some type of a calculator. Maybe a technician needs to go out to somebody's house and calculate how much fencing to put in someone's backyard. We need to operate on these numbers. It's actually text as they type it in. So you need to take that and turn it into numeric value, and you do so by using function value. Okay, and it's going to take it and put it into a numeric type of value there. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to add those two. So these two are the ones that I use a lot. You have other type of things. I think we've got a date value function. Let me put some parentheses in here so it's really obvious I'm talking about functions. There's all kinds of different things to work with, different types, because you could have a Boolean type that's either true or false, but then sometimes you might be working with the string that says true or false in it, which is a string value. It's not a Boolean,
And there's different ways of doing it too. Like you just explained a couple of them that were really good. Another thing that is important, people don't understand is casting, is when you take, I think I talked about it earlier when we were talking about dates, and you have a date time type variable, and you want to get the hour of that day time variable. Well, when you use the hour function in it, when you use a function, that's going to return an integer. So now you're putting that date time, you've gone from a date type time variable down to an integer, because you're taking an integer portion of that, so there's all kinds of tricks that you're going to do. And it might seem like a lot when you're listening to me and Darren talk about this, but when you get to working with the programming and you're actually trying to resolve an issue, so much of this is not going to be like, you guys are going to be seeing this. It's not like, well, I tried it, I entered it, oh, it doesn't work, I got to go, let me go call Kurt and Darren. Nope. A lot of times it'll be like 11 o'clock at night, you'd be working on something, nobody's up, you can't call anybody. So you're sitting there trying to hammer away at this thing, trying to figure out, what am I doing? And you're using all these different resources to your language to try to get something done. And you're going to be figuring out a lot of your problems are going to be dealing with casting stuff into different values. I don't know.
Yeah, become a professional problem solver, right? As a program, that's pretty much your job description, really.
I think it's more like this right here. It's this.
Hold on, let me blow you up a little bit there. Move it down a little bit there. Yeah, chaos coordinator.
Chaos coordinator.
He actually earned that that title. So, Kurt, I was trying to bring up on the screen examples of what you were talking about there. So there is a function called now. Okay. Yeah. And so you talked about using the hour function, and then here we're going to use the minute function, and here we can grab what the second. Right. Yeah. And there's also another value. I don't know that there's a function for this, but I do know we can take now. We can use a text function to actually pull out certain things, and I'm going to say FFFF, which are the milliseconds.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you got hour, minute, second, and then millisecond. So
And then
if,
they've got those date time formats that you can use, the long formats if you wanted to use that. But more important than that, based on that example that what Darren just showed you right there, you use the now function. The now returns a date time, which is the date and time together, right? And that's a variable type. That's a variable type. If you try to add date time variable to a string of characters, it's not going to work. It's going to tell you I can't do it. At least it should. If it's a good language, it's going to do that. Okay. But see, that's the whole date time. But then when he went and took the hour out of it, or the minute, or the second. Well, now he converted that into just an integer. That's an integer data type right there that you're pulling out of that date time. So you're doing some programming magic right there. It's kind of cool. You're putting it in a different kind of bucket, or you're at least making the variable or the number be able to be handled by a different kind of bucket. If you didn't put it in a bucket by itself.
Yeah. Yeah. So as you were talking there, I was thinking, okay, so now gives us the date and time. And then we've got another function for today, and it just gives you the date.
Yeah.
Let's say you've got a date and time, right? And you just want the date value. I know that a date value will take text, or at least it's expecting text, and will
there
give
you
you a
go.
date value.
Now, how do you convert text into a date value? You just said it. You can do it that way. You can actually take a literal string and convert it into a date time. That's casting.
Yes. Casting. Absolutely. So I could have so it typecasts it as a date value, then we display it in a label that's text. There's all kinds of typecasting. So guys, when you're coding, that should be something that just becomes like, okay, what's the data type here? Okay. And PowerScript makes it really easy. You can select it and it's going to tell you date time. Okay. What about today? Date, not date time, date. Okay. We got the date value, select that, boom, date. Now, if I put text around this, okay, now it's a text. What happens if I were to put value around here? Would it allow me to do that? It does not like that. The value cannot be converted to a number. Well, it's got those slashes in there, right?
Yeah.
Well, this is fun stuff.
It's either fun stuff or terribly boring stuff, depending on which side of the geek spectrum you're on.
Guys, if you're here and you think this is fun stuff like we do, you have found your tribe, as someone in our live stream last week said, I found my tribe.
I think that was Elliot that said that last week. Yeah.
All right, let's move on to branching. Branching.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so branching is the use of something, a construct like if this happens, then do this. Otherwise, or else, do something else. And switch does the same thing, given a single value. If it's this, do this. If it's this, do this. So if you've got a lot of nested if statements, chances are you might want to just replace it with a switch. But it's a way of branching. Both either the if or the switch function does that. Okay, so I have those listed out here. So this is the if function, and this is the switch. Okay. So let's have some type of a value, actually use this somehow. Let's say here on the first screen, I could do something like if the user's full name equals their niece, I could say, you're a boss. You're a boss. Otherwise, if you're not a boss, you might be, I don't know. Let's keep it positive. You're special. you know, or
Just keep
I
it
don't know.
positive.
Give me. Okay, what about this?
You're special.
Chaos
Hey,
coordinator.
how about if
You're
we
not a
put,
boss. You're a chaos coordinator. Okay. So there's
Yeah.
a perfect example of using an if. Typically, you don't want to be comparing in a criteria something that's hard coded. You want to use something that's dynamic, either in a variable or some database field or some control value. That's typically what you want to do in a program. So everything's dynamic, you know.
Right.
What do you think about that, Kurt?
Well, I like your example though. I was thinking more like if Ron has the ribs smoked this evening, it's going to be smiles for everybody. If Ron else, nobody's going to be smiling.
What about that example of like going to the grocery store, get some milk? If they have eggs, grab 2 dozen, you know?
Right. If they have eggs, go get 2 dozen milk. They had eggs. I got 2 dozen milk.
So a switch works very similarly to an if. So how we would do a switch in that case is we might do something like there on the first screen. We would open this up, format the text a little bit here. Okay. And what we would do is we would change this if function to a switch. Okay. And we would just look at this user full name. Okay. We're not going to compare it to Darren right now. We're going to go down here. If it is Darren Yeast, then we'll say you're a boss. If it says Kurt, then we want to say, well, I want chaos coordinator. Boom. Otherwise, you're special here. You're special here. Now, what did I do wrong? So sometimes you'll put each of these on separate line. Oh, I need a comma up here. And looks like Dave does have a question about the if statement. When you construct an if statement, does it go based on the first value? Then it goes to the second value over to the next value. Yes, it does. So if the first one's true, okay, I wish I would have just copied what I had there. Yeah, let me make a copy here and I can go back a little bit here. Open this up. Change this to if. What we could do is if full name equals Darren, then it's going to say this. Okay. Otherwise, chaos coordinator, and then, right. So yeah. So this expression is evaluated. And the first parameter for an if is looking for a true or false value. Okay. If it's true, it goes on to the second parameter in the if statement. If this was false, it would go to this third parameter. Okay. Now, what you could end up doing is giving this something that would evaluate to true or false. Okay. Something like this. And the thing is, if statements can be nested. Okay. So if it gets to if this was false, if this was Kurt logging in, I would say Kurt here. If that's true, it'd say chaos coordinator. And I could just keep on adding commas, but it's a way of doing a nested if. Okay. Otherwise, a final else is you're special. Okay. Now, I don't know, Kurt, do you like that you can just keep on running down and they would be all nested? Or would you like to see them indented with actual nested if statements? Which ones do you think?
I think the net. Okay, I got a couple things I want to say about your code. Okay,
no,
not your code.
He's got his red marker out, guys. He's gonna get me.
I do. So here's the thing. I do like the nested if you're so really this could almost be mistaken for a case statement or a switch statement. In other languages, it's called case. You can mistake that for a case statement. I like the conditional if this. So in other words, if I were to write that, I would have liked it to said if it's user or if it's Darren or if it's Kurt, else if it's something else, right? Here's the thing. If you go up to your switch statement, have you got the switch back?
I got all three.
Okay. Let's look at that switch. So you have an else statement in here. And actually the way that's set up.
It's the last one.
Yeah. So that's called a catch-all. Okay. So that's a catch-all. So in my world, in a purist data world, that is bad programming because you don't have control of your program. You shouldn't even be going into that select case or the switch, as this case is, unless it's Darren or Kurt. If you're concerned about Darren or Kurt to make those specified, then you should say if it's Darren or Kurt, then do the case. And that way you're not going to have an else. You don't need the else there.
Yeah, Kurt, what you taught me is what if you have 100 different checks there?
Yeah.
So you're making the compiler go through, or when the code is executed, doing all kinds of unnecessary operations. We could just cut out 90% of that at the very top. Just check to see if it's going to fall into one of our things here.
Make sure it falls in the range first, and then you can put the else in that. You can deal with the else there, but you're looking into your code. Again, I said this before. Have control of your program, man. And this is exactly where we're talking about right there. And that's one of the things I don't like about Power Apps and some of these other languages, today's languages, is because they're just so soft typed, and they allow you to have sloppy programming practices. And then we wonder how come we've got people out there that are so many average bear programmers out there that just don't really know what's going on.
What have you got against bears, man?
Nothing. I want super bears. I don't want average bears. I have a lot of problems with average. Super bears, not Chicago Bears. I'm talking super bears, not Chicago Bears.
Oh,
okay.
Just trying to give you some grief. But yeah, there's three different ways. So I like that we sort of went into that. So here's a nested if then else. Here is effectively the same thing but done differently. Okay. And then the third way is using the switch. So it's good, even though that you will stick with, let's say, the two ways of doing if nesting. No matter which one you stick with, you always need to know the other way, because you're going to take over somebody's program or something, or see some code and like, what's that? That shouldn't be possible, or whatever. But you need to know about it. Sort of like how I don't like forms, but I want to know all about forms, because there's sometimes where I'm going to have to deal with a form. Maybe I wasn't the person that brought it over on a screen, but I might need to be able to tweak it a little bit, or maybe just replace it.
Yeah, Dave Lara's in the comments asking what's the best practice. Now, I think that you were talking about the comment below where you said that's basically what I'm looking to do, is to test the greater value, and if it returns false, go to the next one and test, and if it's false, go to the default. I'm suggesting that you should never go to a default. You should separate the default from the rest of the range. In other words, if you have a range of, like, say, 5 things, set those 5 things. Now, if it's one of those 5 values, now you can go through that switch statement, but then the rest of the stuff should go to the default. In other words, don't go down that switch if it might hit default. Kick those defaults to a different place. What do you think about that?
Consider this scenario, guys. Let's say we have 20 different comparisons in the switch. Okay, 20 different. Back in VB, you had a case this. So each check, okay, is a case. let's say 90% of the time is hitting that default, that catch-all value. Okay. And then that switch is inside of a loop that's slowing your whole program down. Well, let's check to see if there's anything inside this. Let's say 90% of the time there's no value in here. Maybe a bot is hitting our program and doesn't have a name. Okay. So in that case, you might want to say if, I like to do a length check. It's greater than 0.
Yeah.
And it's okay to go do all that switching. Otherwise, now, so look at this example I just gave you guys. I just use an if that has a then block, but it has no else block. And that's something. So you can use an if function with just providing 2 values, the if, the then, and not providing the else. It just means it's not going to do anything for the false part. It's just going to go on back down here.
And it could just mean that you have your if set up so nicely and you're in so good control of your world with that you don't need else. There's people out there that think that you can set it up, you can set your ifs and nest your ifs so that you'll never need an else. You know?
I always think to myself, what am I going to put on my code here in case or not in case they go wrong, but when they do go wrong, because I always want to set myself up. There's going to be bugs in my program, and I want it to be very obvious when there is a bug, so it's easy to debug and troubleshoot. And I'm not sitting there for days or weeks trying to figure what is going on with my app, because you make this assumption, maybe your ego, like, well, my switch is written so well, I never need a catch-all. Go ahead and put a catch-all in there, because once in a while there might be something that you didn't think that might happen, so just something to keep in mind there. All right, so let's talk.
Real quick, Michelle,
Sure.
Look at the comments over here. Says, I know I talk like a below average bear, but inside I think I'm super bear. So I guess I just kind of want to say this to all you guys. If you're on the panelist, you two guys are the panelists, and Darren too. And then you guys all here on live stream. I don't know where you're at in your programming journey, and some of you guys are at different levels, but just the fact that you're sitting here listening to us and you can actually absorb what's going on. Most people can't absorb what we're talking about right here, guys. Most people get lost in this stuff. So the fact that you're just sitting here in this conversation, I already have a profound respect for all of you guys. You guys are not average bears by sitting in here on a Saturday morning or now getting close to afternoon listening to this stuff. Perhaps
the average bears are only watching my YouTube videos during their lunch break Monday through Friday.
Or maybe the average bears wouldn't watch your videos. Super bears, you got to be a super bear to be able to interpret Darren's videos. So he doesn't talk to just the average bears, man. We're not here. In fact, the Accelerator program, we are targeting people who are not average bears. We want to work with so you guys are super bears just by listening into this thing, man. I just wanted to put that out there, and I got a lot of respect for you guys that are doing that.
Yeah. So I wanted to touch on looping. There is a function called for all in which you can loop through something. Before we can really look at an example of that, let's talk about arrays and collections. So a lot of times you'll hear about collections. Very rarely will you hear about an array in Power Apps. And you almost could say that, well, there really aren't arrays. They're all collections. Well, so what we're talking about with arrays and collection are multiple values that can be referenced with a single name. Okay. So if I had a collection of customers, I might have columns and rows. Okay. That would be a collection. Array is typically, you think of like a single column table. Okay. So in other programming languages, we could create an array of numeric values. We could create an array of string values. Okay, so it's just multiple values that you can reference with a single variable name. Okay, so variables in other languages, you either have a variable that's got a single value, or you could have an array of that type. Okay, like an array of strings. Okay, so there is something that you can do within Power Apps that I think is very similar, and I sort of call it an array. So let me just look at an example here to to be a good illustration of this. When you add a drop-down list, okay, what are we given here? So I'll hit Control-0 to zoom out here. So we've got this thing called a drop-down sample. So if I select that, it says table, doesn't say array, and I don't think you'll ever see array. But if I open this up, look, we've got a single column table here, 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Yeah.
And one more example that we could pull from, if this thing doesn't stick to my cursor all the time, is let's bring over a gallery, and we'll do a vertical gallery. I rarely use their predefined gallery, but it says custom gallery sample. Okay, so this is an example of more than one value, 3 fields, and it's not just one field like we have for the drop-down list. Okay, now because I double click on this and it says table, and I think of a table and a collection almost being the same thing. But in here, what I could do, look, I just commented that out, right? Up here, I could use square brackets, and I could say something like yes, no, and maybe. Is that a collection? Okay, so if I
in the old days, that would be an array with the square brackets around
it would. A lot of languages, that's how you define an array. That's an excellent point, Kurt. I wasn't making that connection right there, but until you said it, like, oh yeah. Absolutely. So now if I select all this, what is it going to tell me? It's a table. So
Right.
Are there arrays in Power Apps? No, everything's a collection. But sometimes, when I use these square brackets, I call an array because it
So-
looks like an array. It quacks like an array.
So in the old days, by the old day standards, it is an array. So a table could not be a table unless it has 2 dimensions or more.
Yeah.
2, 3, 4, 5 dimensions. This guy is a table. But a single dimensional, a one-dimensional array is nothing but an array. It's just a list. It's a pocket of memory with a list of values, like Darren said. And you'll notice, though, they kind of say whenever it's got value, whenever you type value in Power Apps, I've noticed it's always one-dimensional. It's like whenever it puts it, it's like it knows it's an array. They know that they're putting an array. The people that are putting Power Apps together, they know that's an array. They just don't want to say the word array, right? They put value. It's a value, But if you use the distinct function, there's a value, and it's just one-dimensional array. If you use the list boxes, it's one-dimensional arrays. So I've never seen a dot value where there's tables sitting out there. Like 2 dimensions, rows and columns. That's a table. Rows and columns is a table. 2 dimensions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So something that we could do is we've got this gallery here that's looking at a collection, okay? And this is like a Power Apps keyword, and it's like this built-in collection you could always reference if you want to. It's great for test data. So I've got a for all, so I'm gonna have a loop. I'm gonna loop through each of these things here. And what I'm gonna do here, let's say for all, and a for all takes 2 parameters, okay? The first parameter is some type of a collection or table, something along those lines, okay? And in this case, I'm going to loop through that collection, okay?
So
Again, I'm going to double.
Before you do that, Darren,
Okay.
you got to understand, guys, there is no iteration in Power Apps. Power Apps doesn't have any for next loops. They don't have do while loops. They only have a for all loop, and it's very limited. But Darren has found some very creative ways to do this. It's pretty smooth. So pay attention. People pay big money for this kind of stuff.
People pay big money for this. So we're gonna loop through this, and let's say I'm looking for a 3. I'm gonna loop through this. I'm gonna find that something that has a 3 in there. Okay. So if we'll go do a find, okay, and I'm looking at Kurt, do you know how I could reference the current record if I'm looping through something? If I get a table up above.
Well, okay, you could use this record, or you could set up your my up there.
You could
maybe
use an alias.
You could use the alias, but I don't think you needed to use the alias if it's just one thing. If you're dealing with two tables, maybe you need to use the alias because it has a hard time with that, right?
Right.
But this record should be just fine for that, right?
That's right.
What do you think?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So we're going to try to find something in here. Okay. Now the for all takes two parameters, the collection. And the second thing is what happens for each of the items that's in there. Okay. So we're going to do an if, we're going to do a find in here. So we're going to find text. I'm looking at this. You see this little thing here, this info on these functions on me. This is very helpful. Okay. So we're looking in here. So we're going to be looking for, I'm going to be looking for the number 3 or the text 3, the string literal 3, right? And I'm going to be looking within this. Okay. Now, Kurt, Jeff, or Ron, do you know what happens if it does find it? What does find give me? Do you guys know the answer to that question? Is it going to be true or false?
It should say true, but I don't know. I've never used find, so I don't know.
Yeah. If you need to find a string within another. So find is a little weird. You almost would expect it to say true or false. Like, yeah, I found it, or no, I didn't find it. Well, a lot of times what you want to know is if it was found, where exactly inside that string was it found? So it's going to give you a numeric value in which it found that string within the other string. Okay.
Okay, the position, the array position, or the row position.
Yes. So let's say if I move this up here, you'll see lorem ipsum 3, and let's say that was 15 characters long. It would give us a number of 3. Now let's say the first and the second time going through the loop, there is no 3. What is it going to return? A 0? Do you think?
I would think. I mean, it couldn't find anything.
Should be a -1.
Well, negative.
You would think, right? It does something weird. Is blank. It returns a blank value if it doesn't find anything.
How inconsistent is that, huh?
So if it is found, you have to check for not is blank. Okay. And what you would say is notify, and we'll say we found an item A3 in there. Okay. In fact,
hold on, Darren. I got a question here, real quick. Did you say, just to repeat that? Did you say if it finds the 3, the number it returns is it the number of the record, the record position, or is it the number, the column position where it found it in the text? Like if it's the 20th position, the number 3 is in the 20th position.
Yeah, it's going to find the position which it finds it.
So
it starts with 1, not a 0. Because in some programming languages, arrays are 0 based, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So in this case, I'm going to say this record, and I can actually display which one it was. In this case, I want to say the let's say the heading. Actually, I looked in the sample text. I want to be looking at the heading because it's the heading that actually has the number in there. So I'll do that. So if we find it in there, it's not going to be blank, right? It's not going to be blank. So if we find it, we're going to send off a notification. Hey, we found it, and this is what we found. Otherwise, we don't want to do anything. We just want to keep looping through there. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to run it, and let's cross our fingers. Hopefully this works as intended. We found an item, lorem ipsum 3. So we successfully looped through it. We found it, and it worked just as we thought it would. So Jeff and Ron and the viewers, what do you guys think of that? Does all that make sense? So it's the for all that allows us to loop.
I really like that too, because so can that be used in a search function? Like if you're going to search a customer database for like you used it for the number 3, but if I wanted to use it for a first name or last name, is that how you would do that?
You could implement a search by doing this, but there's actually a search function that you can utilize, and you can say, hey, this is my collection. Okay. I'm looking for whatever they type in that text box. Okay. So look for that.
Right.
And then you're going to say what fields you want it to go look in. So most of the time, if you do a search, you're going to use that search function.
Got it.
but just realize with a search function, most of the time it's not delegable, which means it's going to go get the first 2,000 records at the most, pull that back and actually perform that search. So if you've got 5,000 records, it's not really working. So data sources like Dataverse, SQL Server are much better with search, where SharePoint is really not so great. So I thought I'd just mention that while we're talking about the search there. But all right, so we've talked about looping with that for all function. We've talked about arrays and collections. You know, I put down here libraries, and libraries are your connectors. So if you go over to data source and you add in, let's say, a connector that ties into Office 365 users or your Outlook, even though that may not be data per se, like a database, these are these libraries. Like with any programming language, you can have libraries that you can tie into and communicate with, either get information out of or pass information in there. So at the very least, I wanted to mention that. So with any language platform, you're going to hear about libraries. Inside of Power Apps with Power Platform, what you're talking about are those connectors or your custom APIs. And Kurt and I just had a recent video about the APIs that anybody can look up. So I'll say custom API connector. Even there, it's still a connector, right? I'd like to have just one or two words about the coding best practices. Okay, so I'm going to move this down here a little bit, and I do plan on having all of this available so you guys can actually reference these notes. So this is an Obsidian, which is a software tool that I'm starting to use. I'm really liking it for taking notes, and it's almost like a wiki where you can sort of point to different notes that you've got in other places. Okay, so there are two sources for best practices that I recommend. Number one is a Microsoft their coding standards and guidelines. Okay, so if you were to bring that up, this is what it looks like here. This is a web page on in their blog or a blog entry, and you scroll down the very bottom. There is a white paper. Okay, and a white paper that you can reference. It's a PDF. That's the one that I recommend. Now it is a little old. Matthew Devaney, which is somebody I respect highly, also has some standards. He actually had the insight to recognize how old those standards were and to provide perhaps additional standards that you might want to implement or change that might be even better than the ones that Microsoft put out there. So yeah. So what do you guys think? Out of all this stuff, was that helpful and valuable?
If you're getting anything helpful out of this, a comment or even a like really helps the channel and lets people like you know this is good content. Much appreciated.
So I would like to say a word. So I invite all of our Accelerator students, not all of them take me up on this, but to be panelists here on these live streams. So this is going to be the first lesson out of the whole module on coding with PowerFX in our Accelerator program. So you guys just got a taste of our first lesson in this. So I hope that you enjoyed it. And if you guys want to know more about the Accelerator program, either email, I got links at the very top of the screen, either email me about it. I can send you some more information about that, but it's a program in which Kurt, me, and any other instructors I pull on board, where we commit to you for a full 12 months and we tutor, guide, coach, mentor, and we have a lot of group sessions, and it's just a great time. It's a great community in which people are reaching their Power Apps goals. So
yeah, so book or call.
Yeah, yep. You guys can book a call with us, and we can love to hear from you guys. I know on YouTube, it's like I'm talking to, I think I've over 10,000 subscribers now. A lot of times it feels like a one-way type of communication. Maybe not so much when I have panelists on here, but I like to hear back from you guys and find your individual stories and how you guys are using Power Apps and perhaps the hurdles and challenges that you guys are having. So yeah, feel free to book a call and we can talk individually with you guys and find out about your individual needs.
For some reason, YouTube thinks you're going to like this video next. Let's see if they're right. Or you can select this playlist, which I've selected for you based on the content you're currently watching. Guys, gotta hurry, click one of them. Otherwise, YouTube's going to autoplay some other video. Which you probably don't.